Hi viewers, my name is Emily, and if you had met me 10 years ago, you would have seen a girl who believed family was everything. I grew up in Manchester, England, where my father built a successful construction company from nothing. He started with one old van, a toolbox, and a dream. By the time I turned 24, his company had become one of the most respected family businesses in the city. My father always told me, Emily, money comes and goes, but your name is forever. Protect your name. I believed those words. I also believed my Uncle Richard. He was my father's younger brother. He laughed with us at Christmas, celebrated birthdays with us, and called me his own daughter. Whenever my father was busy, Uncle Richard would take me for ice cream and tell me how proud he was of me. Never once did I imagine he was waiting for the perfect moment to steal everything. That moment came on a rainy October morning. I received a phone call that shattered my world. My father had suffered a massive heart attack. By the time I reached the hospital, the doctors had already covered his face with a white sheet. My world ended in that single moment. At the funeral, Uncle Richard stood beside me with tears in his eyes. He hugged my mother tightly. "Don't worry," he whispered. "I'll take care of both of you." My brother would have wanted that. Those words comforted us. We trusted him completely. For the next few weeks, he handled every business matter. He said my mother was too heartbroken to deal with paperwork. We never questioned him. 3 months later, he invited us to the company headquarters. I thought it was finally time to discuss how we would continue my father's legacy. Instead, it became the worst day of my life. The company's lawyer placed several documents on the table. Uncle Richard smiled politely. "There was something your father never told you," he said. My heart started racing. The lawyer cleared his throat. "According to this will, your father transferred full ownership of the company to Richard shortly before his death." I stared at the papers. No, it couldn't be true. My father had spent years teaching me every part of the business. He always said one day I would lead the company. Why would he suddenly leave everything to his brother? I looked at my mother. She was shaking. There must be some mistake. Uncle Richard sighed dramatically. "I know this is difficult, but these were your father's wishes." I reached for the documents. The signature looked like my father's. But something felt wrong. Something deep inside me screamed that it wasn't real. Before I could speak again, Uncle Richard delivered another blow. "I'm afraid you'll also need to vacate the company house by the end of the week. It belongs to the business." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "The house? That's our home." He looked away without emotion. "I'm sorry. Sorry." That single word destroyed everything. Within 7 days, my mother and I packed our lives into a tiny rented flat. Neighbors whispered. Old employees avoided eye contact. Everyone believed Uncle Richard's story. They thought we had simply accepted my father's final wishes. Only I knew my father would never abandon us. Every night I replayed our last conversation. He had smiled at me and said, "One day, this company will be yours." Those words refused to leave my mind. Weeks turned into months. Bills piled up. My mother quietly sold her jewelry to pay rent. Sometimes I caught her crying when she thought I was asleep. It broke my heart. I wanted to fight, but I had no proof. No money, no powerful lawyers, nothing. One afternoon I walked past my father's old office. Through the glass window, I saw Uncle Richard sitting in my father's chair. Laughing, signing contracts, living the life that belonged to my father. To my family. At that moment, something inside me changed. The frightened daughter disappeared. A determined woman took her place. I whispered to myself, "You may have stolen our business. But you haven't stolen the truth." I turned around and walked away without saying a word. Because I finally understood something. Revenge isn't about anger. Real revenge is patience. Real revenge is preparation. Real revenge is winning without breaking the law. And from that day forward, I dedicated my life to taking back everything my father had built. Legally, even if it took years. The day I walked away from my father's office, I made a promise that changed my life forever. I would never fight my uncle with anger. I would fight him with evidence. The next morning, I found a full-time job at a small construction supply store. The pay was barely enough to cover rent, but every paycheck had a purpose. During the day I worked. At night I studied business management, accounting, and company law. While other people spent weekends relaxing, I spent mine in libraries reading about contracts, company records, inheritance law, and corporate fraud. Years passed. My uncle became richer. His face appeared in newspapers, business magazines, and local charity events. Everyone praised him as the man who had saved my father's company. Every headline felt like another lie. One evening, I met an elderly former employee named Mr. Harris in a cafe. He looked nervous before speaking. "Emily," he whispered, "your father never planned to give the company away." My heart stopped. "What do you mean?" "He was preparing you to become the next director. He said it almost every day." Those words confirmed what I had always believed. "But I can't prove it," I said quietly. Mr. Harris looked around before sliding a small notebook across the table. I kept records of every important company meeting. Inside were handwritten notes dating back several years. One page caught my attention immediately. "Meeting with solicitor postponed. Final ownership transfer to Emily planned next month." I read the sentence again and again. Tears filled my eyes. Someone had changed my father's plans after his death. That notebook became my first real piece of hope. A few weeks later, another surprise arrived. One of my father's old accountants contacted me secretly. He said he had resigned because certain financial records no longer made sense. Late that evening, we met in a quiet parking lot. He handed me copies of financial statements. "There are payments here that should never have existed," he said. Large sums of money had been transferred into companies owned by my uncle. Some invoices were fake. Several signatures looked inconsistent. For the first time, I wasn't chasing a feeling. I was collecting evidence. But I knew I needed professional help. After months of searching, I found a solicitor who specialized in corporate fraud. I expected him to reject my case. Instead, he spent 3 hours reading every document. Finally, he looked up. "If these records are genuine," he said, "your uncle has a very serious problem." Those words gave me hope I hadn't felt in years. Our investigation became even deeper. We requested old company filings, compared signatures, tracked bank transfers, interviewed former employees. Slowly, the truth began to emerge. The so-called will had been signed only days before my father's death. Yet hospital records showed my father was unconscious during that period. It didn't make sense. Then came the biggest breakthrough. A retired secretary remembered seeing my uncle remove files from my father's office the night after the funeral. She had stayed silent for years because she feared losing her pension. Now she was ready to tell the truth. One witness became two became five. The lies were beginning to crack. Meanwhile, my uncle had no idea what was happening. He believed I had moved on. Whenever we crossed paths at public events, he smiled with confidence. "Still working those small jobs?" he asked one afternoon. I smiled politely. "Yes." He laughed and walked away. He never realized that every insult pushed me closer to victory. After nearly 5 years of investigation, our legal team finally had enough evidence to file a case. The documents filled several large boxes. Financial reports, witness statements, expert opinions, bank records, handwriting analysis. Every page brought me one step closer to justice. The court accepted our claim. My uncle received the official notice. For the first time in years. He looked afraid. He called me repeatedly. I ignored every call. Then he sent a message. "Let's settle this privately." I stared at the screen before deleting it. He had shown my mother and me no mercy. Now he wanted mercy for himself. No, the truth belonged in a courtroom. The next hearing would decide everything. As I stood outside the courthouse on the morning of the trial, I looked up at the sky and whispered, "Dad, I'm bringing your company home." Then I walked through the courthouse doors, ready to face the man who had stolen everything from us. The courtroom was silent as I walked inside. For the first time in years, my Uncle Richard didn't look confident. He sat across the room with his expensive lawyers, avoiding my eyes. The man who had once smiled while stealing my father's company suddenly looked nervous. I took a deep breath. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about the truth. The judge entered the courtroom, and everyone stood. The hearing began. My uncle's lawyer argued first. He claimed Richard had sacrificed everything to save the company after my father's death. He insisted the will was genuine and that I was only making accusations because I wanted money. Listening to those lies was painful. But I stayed calm. Our solicitor stood and presented the first piece of evidence. Hospital records. They proved my father had been unconscious on the exact date the supposed will was signed. A quiet murmur spread through the courtroom. Richard's lawyer quickly claimed the date might have been recorded incorrectly. Then our second witness stepped forward. Mr. Harris, the retired employee, spoke with confidence. He described years of meetings where my father had openly prepared me to inherit the company. He even produced his handwritten notebook. The judge carefully examined every page. Richard shifted uneasily in his chair. But the biggest moment was still to come. Our handwriting expert was called to testify. He compared my father's authentic signatures with the signature on the disputed will. Large images appeared on the courtroom screen. The expert pointed out differences in pressure, letter formation, spacing, and movement. Then he said the words I had waited years to hear. In my professional opinion, this signature was not written by your father. The courtroom fell completely silent. My uncle's face turned pale. His lawyer tried to challenge the expert, but every question led to the same conclusion. The signature was forged. Then came another surprise. The former company accountant explained how money had quietly been transferred from the business into companies secretly controlled by Richard. Bank statements, invoices, and financial records were displayed one after another. The pattern was impossible to ignore. The judge's expression became more serious with every document. Finally, the retired secretary testified. She admitted she had seen Richard removing confidential files from my father's office immediately after the funeral. She had stayed silent for years because she feared losing her livelihood. Now, she wanted to tell the truth. Richard could no longer stay calm. He suddenly stood up. "They're all lying," he shouted. The judge immediately ordered him to sit down. That single outburst revealed more than any document ever could. After several days of testimony, both sides delivered their final arguments. Our solicitor looked directly at the judge. "This case is not simply about money. It is about trust, fraud, and the theft of a family's legacy." Then everyone waited. The longest 30 minutes of my life. When the judge returned, the courtroom became completely still. He began reading his decision. The court found overwhelming evidence that the will had been forged. The transfer of ownership was declared invalid. The company legally belonged to my father's estate. As his only rightful heir, ownership was restored to me. I closed my eyes. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Then tears rolled down my face. Not tears of sadness, tears of relief. The judge continued. Because of the financial evidence presented, the case would also be referred to the authorities for a criminal investigation into fraud and document forgery. Richard's shoulders dropped. The man who had taken everything from us had lost it all. As court officers approached him, he looked at me. For the first time, there was no arrogance. Only regret. But some apologies arrived far too late. A week later, I walked back into my father's company. The employees stood and applauded. Many of them had known the truth in their hearts but had been too afraid to speak. I walked into my father's old office. Everything looked almost the same. His desk, his chair, the family photograph he always kept near the window. I gently placed my hand on the desk and whispered, "We did it, Dad." The company wasn't just a business. It was his dream, and now, it would continue with honesty instead of greed. Over the following months, I rebuilt the company, rehired loyal employees, and created scholarships in my father's name for young people who wanted to start careers in construction. His legacy became stronger than ever. Looking back, I realized something important. Hatred would never have brought my father back. Anger would never have restored what we lost. Only patience, truth, and justice could do that. My uncle thought he had stolen my future. But in the end, he only delayed it. Because the truth has one thing that lies never do. Time. And sooner or later, the truth always wins.